Hey everybody, welcome to another off-the-shelf board game review. This week we're continuing our series on Elder Sign. Now, Elder Sign is a dice allocation game for 1 to 8 players. It's a fully cooperative game, and this is actually a video review for the game itself. If you want to see how to play the game, get a quick overview, or see some actual sample gameplay, check out the other videos in the series. This video series is dedicated towards Elder Sign, but this specific video itself is going to focus on a review of the game. Now, like I said, Elder Sign is a cooperative game for 1 to 8 players based in the Arkham horror universe from Fantasy Flight Games based on the writings of H.P. Lovecraft. And this is a dice allocation game where players will be rolling dice to get various different results from the dice to go ahead and complete adventures, with the eventual goal is trying to shut down these great old ones for waking up and completely destroying the earth. And now, Elder Sign at its core is a dice rolling game, and good dice rolling games will allow you to mitigate your luck. Great dice rolling games will allow you to make sure that every single one of the turns you play is going to be 100% useful to the game. And Elder Sign falls in the category of what I like to call a good dice rolling game. See, in this game, players do have lots of ways to mitigate their luck of dice rolls, because we all know that dice rolling can cause a lot of randomness and a lot of chaos. If you don't feel that way, if you don't really care about dice mitigation, well, then we'd all be playing left, center, and right and calling it the best game in the world. And unless you're drunk, we know that is definitely not the case. See, Elder Sign is built as a game, and again, this is in the Arkham horror universe, and this is almost feels like it's an Arkham horror, not eldritch horror, but actually looking at Arkham horror. It's kind of like taking the gameplay mechanics of Arkham horror and consolidating them. And when you consolidate things, you have to make sacrifices, but it's an effort to consolidate things to take a game such as Arkham horror that can take anywhere from 4 to 6 hours based on the player count, and take it down to a game that may be 90 minutes to an hour and a half. I'm sorry, 90 minutes to 2 hours. Still playing with the 1 to 8 players as a cooperative game, so you have to sacrifice some things, but you still get a feel of the Arkham horror universe. You still get the intimacy of the Arkham horror world, whereas games such as Eldritch Horror feel like more of, Indiana Jones in the Arkham universe. This has the intimacy of horror, like such as horror movies such as Waxwork, and other horror movies where they bring the intimacy down to the good level for your horror, because this is horror based in a museum where the players as a group are trying to stop a great ancient old one, the bad guys, from waking up and destroying all of civilization. Now, the nice thing about Elder Sign, like I've already said, is it does have lots of ways to mitigate the luck in the game, and that's actually very important for a lot of players, because that is one thing that keeps a lot of players from enjoying dice games, especially games that can really rely on the dice almost 100%, such as the case of Elder Sign, where you're basically rolling dice and trying to get these dice to match these symbols on these various locations to gain these rewards, and these rewards are going to help you get more better things. They're going to help you get the things you need to shut down these bad guys, and of course they're going to get you the things that you need to overall just win the game. So the game has things that need to be put into it to create a lot of mitigation of your luck, because if there's no mitigation of luck, you basically just feel like you're wasting your time. It's just basically a time waster where you're rolling dice, hoping you get the rewards that you need. If not, you're basically going to move on because you have no way to control what's going on. And that's the nice thing about Elder Sign. Again, it is a little bit of a luck fest because you have the fickleness of dice, but the game does have different built-in ways to mitigate luck. You have ways to mitigate luck, whereas you can get very certain kind of items that you can pick up that are going to give you more dice. And again, you can always understand anytime you're going to roll more dice, you have a better chance of mitigating luck. Whether it's a yellow dice that can give you certain results, or it's even the red dice that can give you certain results, you can spend these cards to go ahead and roll more dice to give you better chances to complete these adventures. And now these adventures have varying amounts of difficulty. And while this can be a positive, and it can also be a negative here, and again, let's preface this right now and tell you I'm basically talking about the basic box of Elder Sign here. I'm not talking about any of the expansions. I'm going to actually talk about the expansions in a different video, because they do upgrade the gameplay quite a bit and they make the game a lot better. But again, I just want to cover the basic set box right here, and I'm actually going to do a separate video series for the expansions telling you how they improve the gameplay. So understand that some of the comments I'm going to be making about the base set right here, my opinion actually does change when you start throwing the expansions, and I'm saying my opinion is going to change in a very positive way. I think all the expansions add a lot to the game, but let's ignore the segue for a second and go back to our main point here. Anyways, you're basically rolling all these dice trying to get those results right here, and you are fighting the randomness of the fact that there's different amounts of difficulties in all these cards. And like I said, it does add a lot of replay to the game, because you have 6 locations to go through out of this large stack of cards. And of course, you'll be cycling through the stack of cards, but I have never played a game where I managed to go through all these cards. Matter of fact, if I was willing to take a bet on this, I bet I've never actually managed to even go through more than half of this deck of cards every single time I played the game. So you do have a little bit of more fickleness of fate there because every one of these locations has different amounts of difficulty to conquer these locations. And that's one thing that can be a positive and can be a negative here about Elder Sign, because it does cause the potential for all the players to do this hunting and pecking when they're going through and playing the game, because you're basically going to look at a location and say, okay, this is the reward I get for this location. While it's a decent reward, I can go over to this other location. While the reward may not be quite as good, it's a location that I can very, very easily complete. So players are going to be hunting and pecking, trying to get to the perfect locations that help them build up their success rates, so they have a better chance of succeeding in the game. And that can be a positive and that can be a negative. And for me, it is a little bit of a negative because it causes the players to remove themselves from the game a little bit as they try to math things out. And again, like I said, positive or negative, that's up to your individual interpretation. For me, it's a little bit of a negative. And again, that is one of the things that's actually fixed with basically all the expansions. And it's definitely fixed in a good way. And when I talk about those expansions, I'll go over them quite a bit. But basically, just a short version is these cards all come into play face down. And there's basically 3 different colors that tell you how difficult that location is. So you have the green locations, not so difficult, the yellow locations that are a little more difficult, and finally the red locations were extremely difficult. You know, you don't want to tackle these locations until you manage to build up your supply of items, built up your supply of artifacts, built up your supply of people that you can hire to work for you, built up your supply of spell books and everything. So again, there is a little bit of randomness in the game, the way these cards come out, because sometimes the randomness will just work against you. Sometimes you're going to draw a whole bunch of cards that have requirements and quests that are extremely difficult, that are going to be impossible to complete, or nearly impossible to complete with just the basic 6 dice you get when you start the game, barring the use of extra cards that give you extra abilities. But it can become a very daunting task because you're just going to have to either roll absolutely perfectly on these green cards, or just hope you don't get bad event cards that are going to take away your dice, lock your dice, and make things even more difficult to win the game. And that kind of segues into another point I must warn you about this game. This game does have a rich get richer and a poor get poorer kind of thing that you have to mention when you talk about Elder Sign. And what I mean by that is, if you start succeeding in a lot of these little adventures with all these cards, you're going to start getting rewards. Well, the more rewards you get, the more cards you're going to have available to you, which is, again, going to give you more dice. It's going to allow you to start mitigating the luck. But if you get a really rough start where you start failing quite a bit, and you're burning these cards to get the extra dice, but you're still not completing these adventures, you're going to start getting negatives. You're going to burn through all these cards and basically be stuck back with your basic green dice without the extra bonuses, and it's going to make the game a lot more difficult. So again, there's a little bit of a fickleness of fate in the game, but the game does have some very good abilities to start mitigating the luck and start making the luck work a little bit more in your favor. But there's just something I have to be honest about here. There are going to be times when you're going to play Elder Sign where the fate and the dice are 100% against you. You're going to continue to draw things that are going to take dice away from you. They're going to continue to lock your dice, reduce your abilities to win the game, and you're just going to come into a no-win situation where you just absolutely are unable to complete the scenario. Now that we covered the potential gripes anybody can have with Elder Sign, let's look at the really cool things that Elder Sign does, and it actually does very, very well. Let's just completely ignore the fact that it takes the Arkham horror game and shortens down a heck of a lot while still managing to keep the theme, because you do feel like you're in the Arkham horror universe. And again, you do keep the intimacy of horror because it keeps it down in the very small scale. You're looking at a town in Arkham Horror, and in Elder Sign, you're looking at trying to stop a great elder old one from entering the world through a museum. So it's really cool, and they've done a fantastic job of shrinking it down. You've gone from a 4-hour playtime to about an hour and a half playtime, even when you start heading up on the higher player counts. And there's a lot of built-in variety in this game to ensure that the game is going to have a lot of variety every single time you play the game. Now, the game does play for 1 to 8 players, but it comes with a lot more than just 8 investigators. And while I'm going to talk about what I think is optimal player count for the game in just a few moments here, just understand that there's tons of variety here because all these investigators play differently. They all have a tendency to kind of work together with each other. Some will kind of feed off each other really well. Some of them don't. And of course, you can use that to mitigate the luck and also introduce more challenges or reduce the challenges by picking investigators that work really well together. Or if you think the game's not hard enough, pick some investigators that don't work so well together and see how challenging the game can really be. Also notice that there are a lot of elder, great old ones in the game to add a lot of variety to the game. And every one of these old ones play differently. And it may not seem like it just looking at these cards, but these old ones do add a lot of variety to the game because they all have special powers. They all have a different amount of variety of things that you need to do or amount that you need to accomplish to defeat these guys, remove them from the world, and lock them up and prevent them from entering the world. So you have a lot of variety potential in the game just because you're only going to pick one of these old ones every time you play the game. You're only going to pick a handful of these investigators every time you play the game, and you're going to have a different starting setup every time you play the game, a large variety of cards, and the rewards and the way this is all going to happen every time you play the game is going to be a lot of variety, making sure that you just have tons of fun with the game if you can get past the little bit of luck mitigation that you need to circumvent to enjoy this game. Because again, like I said earlier, that luck can be a little bit of a bear, and if you can't stop the bad luck, you really cannot win the game. So I enjoy the fact that there's a lot of variety in the game, even with the monsters adding a little bit more to the theme of the game. And again, adding a little more variety. And the monsters ensure that some of these locations, even though you've encountered these locations before, if you draw a monster, that location is going to be a little bit different, and you're going to change up your strategies and figure out how you're going to play the game differently. Plus, you also get the variety of how the weapons are going to come out, the spells, the artifacts, and even just the eventual Mythos cards that are going to come out and make your life difficult. Again, lots of extra Mythos cards. You're never going to use all these cards every time you play the game. Actually, there's enough Mythos cards in the game because your average game of Elder Sign is going to go through maybe 10 to 14 days. Whether you're going to win or not going to win the game, those are going to be the average amount of plays or the amount of days you're going to have when you're playing the game, based on the clock, of course, when I'm talking about when I'm saying days, not game rounds, but actual full days of the game. You're going to have about 10 to 14 full days in the game, so you see how many cards, and you average only one of these cards per day. So you're going to see there's lots of variety. You're going to probably play multiple games before you start seeing any of these cards start cycling through again. So there's lots of variety, and they do change up the gameplay quite a bit. So there's a lot of variety built into the game, and that's actually a really cool thing. And I think they did a really fantastic job of that. Again, shrinking the Arkham horror game down, adding, giving you still the feel, still giving the intimacy of horror there, and still making a pretty darn good game, even though it can feel occasionally like it's a little bit of a luck game where you're fighting the dice and trying to enjoy the game. Now, Elder Sign does play for 1 to 8 players, and you can very easily play this as a single-player game, cooperative game, by just playing one single investigator. It doesn't make the game impossible. There's not a minimum amount of investigators. It's not one of those games where you have to control these 4 heroes to go through the adventure. You can pick up one investigator, play through the entire game, and you still have a pretty good chance of playing it, and you can play all the way up to 8 investigators. Now, in my opinion, the way the game plays, the way the mechanics are set up, I personally think that Elder Sign plays best as a game for 3 to 4 players. And now here's the main reason why I say this. Now, if you haven't watched an instructional video or anything like that for Elder Sign, understand that the objective of the game is to lock away these great old ones by getting a certain amount of Doom tokens, a certain amount of Elder Signs before you get a certain amount of Doom tokens. So on average, again, totally talking about averages about how the game works, as every one of these Doom tokens represents 1 full day of gameplay. So let's take a great old one like Azathoth. You see that it takes a total of 12 Doom tokens to go ahead and seal him away so he doesn't enter the world. So that means your average game, at most, assuming that Azathoth doesn't wake up and make your life difficult, because on average you're going to get 1 Doom token per complete day of the game, not per little player turn, but for each total turn of the game. So you're looking at like a great old one like Azathoth would take 14 max turns to play the game. Well, the way the game works is every single player is going to advance the clock by 3 hours every single time they take their turn. So if you have a 1-player game, you're going to have 1, 2, 3, 4 turns you're going to get just alone before you're going to advance the day. And again, remember, the averages show that 1 full day is going to average 1 Doom token. So if you start playing a 2-player game, you're going to have, each player is going to get 2 turns per day. So matter of fact, that means every player is going to get about 24 turns, or I'm sorry, 28 turns if you take Azathoth. But if you start playing an 8-player game, that means the clock is going to go around 2 days before every single player gets 1 turn. So now you just halved the amount of turns that every single player gets, and you've also extended the amount of time that every single player needs to wait before they start playing their turn. So while the game does play for up to 8 players, and the rules do allow you to do that, and it is balanced for that kind of gameplay, I think Elder Sign plays perfectly as a 3 to 4 player game, just because of the way the mechanics work with the clock, ensuring that every person gets an equal amount of turns, everybody has an equal amount of enjoyment without a lot of downtime. Now, this isn't a game where a lot of players are going to take a lot of time to try to figure out what they're going to do for their turn. Your basic mechanic of every single player is they're going to look at the 6 available locations, or possibly more if we have any gates open to other worlds. So maybe 7 locations. They're going to figure out which one is going to help them best get the rewards they need while paying attention to how far the great old one is waking up and then they're going to roll some dice, see if they succeed, lock some dice, hopefully use the mitigation of the game by locking dice, by putting them on their investigators, asking other players for help wherever they may do, and they're going to roll the dice a couple times, and they're going to move on to the next player. So your turns don't take that long, but in an 8-player game, considering how short your turns actually be, or can be, it does make the game seem like it goes on a little bit too long. So that's why, in my opinion, I think Elder Sign is best as a 3 to 4 player game. Now, I think Elder Sign is a good game. It does the right things. It allows you to mitigate the luck, but not mitigating it so much that it feels like you're not playing a dice game at all. Because let's be honest, dice games have to have a certain amount of luck built into them. Otherwise, it's not a dice game, and it kind of defeats the purpose. But again, on the other end of the spectrum, you don't need so much luck in the game that what you're doing and the decisions you're making are totally irrelevant. They're not going to matter at all to the game. So the game does a very nice job of balancing between those two extremes, ensuring that you can mitigate the luck while still enjoying the game. It's got a lot of built-in variety built in the game, thanks to the way that the Mythos cards come out, all the equipment, all the investigators involved in the game, and the bad guys, and just the way the game comes out. So the base game is very well done in that aspect. As a dice game, as a game where you're trying to match up symbols to discover these locations, it's done very, very well there. I think Elder Sign and the base set itself is a pretty good game, but my problem with trying to do a review of the base game is trying to compare an okay card to a really nice card, because the game gets so much better when you add the expansions. So if you want to check out my opinion on how much better the game improves with those expansions, check out those separate videos. But if you have any comments or questions about this video itself, about this review of Elder Sign, make sure you leave them down in the YouTube comments down below. I'll be sure to answer them as quickly as I can. You can also feel free to email me at offtheshelfboardgamereviews. That is otsbgr@gmail.com. If you enjoy this video and you want to help support it, toss $1 over in the tip jar over at patreon.com. That's patreon.com/otsbgr. If you enjoy this video and you enjoy this video series, click that like button, click that subscribe button, and as always, thanks for watching.